My name is Allison Bushman. I work in the Robotics Automation and Dance Lab at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Today I'm going to be doing a short presentation on some of the work we recently just did in the lab, as well as a future study that we're currently working on to further our research. So, as we've said before, we live in an incredibly dynamic world, and as mobile agents, we must rely on the use of complex movement designs to move throughout our environments. And one example of this might be a police standoff or a hostage negotiation. In both of these cases, human lives are being put at risk, and the reactions rely heavily upon body language. So in this situation, what we might consider is a teleoperated robot capable of expressive movement that would be beneficial. So to this end, we argued that rapid pose control for robots may offer increased flexibility and more success in dynamic environments, as well as generate fluid and human-like motion. So this is actually the third installment in research that we've been doing into human likeness and pose control of robot motion. Unfortunately, I don't have quite as much time as I would like to go into our different research, but essentially the first one focused on creating high-level movement commands in different robotic platforms, specifically the Baxter robot. The second one focused on developing a teleoperational scheme using an Xbox controller, as well as developing 4 different tasks, both static and dynamic, as well as 1 and 2 arm, to test each of these teleoperational schemes. And so what we did was we developed our own choreography-inspired method that was based on the Laban-Bartenieff movement system. And then we also created a benchmark method from just different interviews with soldiers who had controlled the PackBot. Obviously, this is not the actual control for the PackBot, but from interviews we concluded that it was controlled in a joint-by-joint sequential fashion, where only one joint was able to be controlled at a time. And this can be seen in the average active joints per task. Meanwhile, our RCC method averages about 2.6 to 3 active joints throughout the task. So in this particular work, we were doing a user study with 38 in-lab participants for 2 hours per session. And the important thing to note here is that none of them were familiar with the Laban-Bartenieff movement system, and several of them were not actually very familiar with the Xbox One controller as well. So we introduced them to the ideas of the Laban-Bartenieff movement system. First, we introduced them to the idea of a kinesphere, which is the bubble of space in which someone is able to move. So we have near reach, middle reach, far reach, and further reach. Near reach is anything close to or touching the body. Far reach is your arm fully extended. Middle reach is somewhere in between. So we want to think of these as concepts rather than measurable values. Additionally, we described the idea of a spatial pool to them, which is comprised of both plane and direction. So within each kinesphere, we have a high, middle, and low plane, as well as 8 different spatial poles: forward, backward, right, left, and all of the diagonals. So once these concepts were described, we showed them how that they were mapped to the actual robot platform. Unfortunately, we don't have time to watch all of these videos, but this was for the joint-by-joint method. And this was for the RCC method. They were given these visuals so that they were able to understand the controls. Once they had completed both tasks, they were asked to compare each of the 2 methods of control. So we looked at the performance, and what we saw was that for both methods, the ability to complete static tasks was about 80% or higher for both methods of control. However, once we got into dynamic tasks, such as pushing a balloon into a whiteboard, we showed that our RCC method was actually more favorable. Additionally, for perception, we found that the joint-by-joint method was seen as more precise, easier to use, and safer, as well as more articulate. However, our method was perceived as faster, more fluid, and more expressive. Okay, so the current user study that we have will be showing videos of this to observers who are not controlling the robot and asking them to use descriptors that were given to us by in-lab participants, and asking these viewers to choose these words in order to validate the perceptions that we found in this work. So our hypothesis is that the movement produced by our novel choreography-inspired method of control will be observed as more human-like and natural than the joint-by-joint method. Thank you.